Which are the best solo builds in Guild Wars 2 PvE? This is a question we want to answer today in form of a tier list. I record this video at the beginning of July 2025. This is what the current meta looks like in my opinion. As always, special shout out to all my supporters on YouTube and Patreon that help me keep the lights on, and now without much further ado, let's jump straight in. Let's start with a disclaimer and the criteria of this tier list. Of course, this is my opinion. I try to be as objective as possible, but this is my opinion. Please let me know your takes in the comments down below. I try to give you my arguments why I think like that, but this is not perfectly objective and the absolute truth. Keep that in mind. Also, I have a very hard time rating some of the specs, which we will get to, but you can see here we have a very interesting designed tier list, so it's not the usual D2S tier. I made a little bit of an adjustment here because I think soloing and doing open world stuff has multiple criteria. So let's quickly cover it before I mention any classes where I would want to put them. So first, my solo builds that I release on my YouTube channel. Be sure to check out the link in the description to all my builds if you want to see them, because all of the builds that I mention here, I actually have a build guide video about it. This tier list is for specifically being alone. This is really the important part. You don't want to play these builds in a group scenario. That doesn't mean they are bad there. They are just not as good as group builds that I have, raiding builds or fractal builds or whatever, yeah? So these are really specifically crafted builds that if you want to play alone or just want to be on the safe side if you can't trust your allies around you to provide you with boons and stuff, or just to survive. So there are two options why you would play those builds. Only then those builds, in my opinion, can shine. So the first option is that you are a good player, that you know what you're doing, and you want to solo content that's actually not made for being soloed. So for example, doing bounties, doing legendary bounties, doing fractals CM solo, doing fractals in general solo, or just whatever solo content in instances, or also the open world, hero points in Verdant Brink, in all the Heart of Thorns areas, wherever it's actually challenging to do solo, you want to have a build that is capable of doing this. That's the first option. Just a very good build to do very hard content with, or that is not made for being played alone. And the second option is that you are a new player, you are just someone that is actually playing the open world alone, and you want to have no struggles in everything that you encounter. You want to be able to solo anything that you get, even if it's like not that hard, but you want to have a brain off build that is very easy to play, really strong, does everything on its own, and you just want to play the builds for fun. You want to not play really try hard and like play a full DPS raiding build that can easily kill the boss, but you have to concentrate really hard. No, you want to play a build that is really easy or just very comfortable to play. So those are the two builds, or the two options why you would play those builds. I think there are other options as well, but just keep in mind, this is not optimized for being played in groups or in big meta events where you have like 50 other people around. They can work there as well, but they are not optimized for that. Keep that in mind. So with that much criteria out of the way, let's finally get to putting some classes in. So I would say let's start with the core classes. And I already made a tier that is here called baseline. And this is for specifically core classes. I want to put all core classes here for now, because I think the core classes can perfectly work fine in the open world for soloing stuff. Yeah. So that's why this is the baseline. Every build in Guild Wars 2, or every elite spec and spec, I should rather say, is perfectly capable of soloing anything in the game, or most of the stuff that is soloable. However, this is the baseline in my opinion. That means that every build that is better than those, I put in a higher tier. That doesn't mean that the classes that are in the baseline are bad. Don't get me wrong here. I'm just saying they are not as good as the S and A- tier. Keep that in mind. So do we have any exceptions here? I would say Core Ranger is surprisingly decent, but I think it's overshadowed by other elite specs. So I will leave it for now in baseline. You can see this is already telling you the baseline is actually quite high. The same goes for Core Revenant and Core Thief. I think they are all three actually surprisingly good. Yeah, maybe let's put those classes here already a bit up. And I think Core Necromancer maybe as well. Maybe A- makes a fair point. I think Core Mesmer is not as broken as it could be, so that's why I leave it in baseline. Then we have Core Guardian. Core Guardian is for me actually an A+ tier build. It's actually surprisingly good. The same goes for Core Warrior. So that's my split. So I can see the baseline is actually maybe, it's hard to judge if those 5 builds actually deserve A- or if there should also be baseline. It's just clear to me that Core Guardian and Core Warrior are actually really good in comparison to the other core specs. They will not outclass other A+ tier builds. So because of that, I actually have to probably demote those core classes and make sure that those are in A- and put some other builds in A+ tier. I think that's somewhat fair. But keep in mind, Mesmer and core Elementalist, in my opinion, are worse than those other core specs, I would say. So now let's get finally to it. And this time, let's start with the light armor classes. Because I always usually start with heavy armor classes, let's turn it around. So let's start with Elementalist. I think Catalyst is, in my opinion, with the hammer build, it got a bit nerfed, sadly, with the last balance patch. It doesn't have the craziest amount of damage anymore, but in my opinion, it's very easy to play. It is not the highest damage output, but it has crazy boons, so that's why I put it in S tier. I think Catalyst deserves a very easy spot, and it's very fun to play. I think it is deserving the S tier spot in very easy way more than in strong, because we have stronger builds in S strong build. But let's leave it for now like that. Then we have Weaver. I think Weaver is interesting because you can make a Weaver build that is surprisingly decent. But I personally think Weaver is one of the worst elite specs to be played in a solo scenario. It is okay, but it gets overshadowed by some others, so I think I put it in A- for that. That doesn't mean it's bad, that's why it's A. Keep that in mind. Everything that is not baseline actually is really good, just not as good as A+ or S tier. So Weaver is surprisingly decent at it as well. And then we have, of course, the Giga buff Tempest. Tempest is like extremely strong right now. I think it's the best Elementalist spec to be played in a solo scenario. It is very easy to play, in my opinion. And I think it's also very strong. So where would I put it, to be honest? I would put it probably in strong for one single reason, even though it's very easy as well. Because you can, this is one of the exceptions where you can play this exact build in a group scenario and will perform very well as well. So this is one of the builds that is extremely, really, like, you can play everywhere and everyone will be happy about that. So that's really good. Just don't play it in raids if you don't want to play the tank. But that's about it. It's really, really good. I have a guide about it, of course, on my YouTube channel as well, so check that out. Let's now go to Mesmer. Mesmer is interesting because Mesmer has one of the easiest solo builds possible, and that's Mirage. Staff Mirage goes into S tier because of that. It's very easy in my opinion. It's pretty strong, not the highest damage, but pretty strong. And you can also make some more aggressive builds that are still quite easy and not as strong as strong tier builds, but in my opinion still very good, very easy to play. Highly recommend to play that if you like to have an easy just dodging build. Then we have Virtuoso. You can play a power Virtuoso that is solo and surprisingly decent. I would put it because of that in A+ tier. It is not deserving an S tier build slot in my opinion because it's not as broken as S tier builds. It has very, very fun combos and it's very nice to play, but it's a power build and it's not completely squishy, but it's quite squishy. Has nice defenses, but if it gets hit, it actually gets hit quite hard. So I would say because of that, it's an A+ tier build. It's better than I-, I would say, but definitely not deserving S tier. And then we have Chronomancer. Chronomancer, in my opinion, is really good because you can play Chronomancer with, I would say, Condi and power. Condi is better in my opinion. And I think because of that, because of the Condi build, I put it in strong because it's really, really good how much damage you can put out with the Condi build if you play the correct relic. But it is, in my opinion, a little bit harder to play than Mirage. That's why it's going into strong and not very easy, even though it's not too hard to play either. Let's now go to Necromancer as the last light armor class. Necromancer has 3 specs and all of them are actually surprisingly good in solo play. So of course we have the King Reaper or the Queen, whatever you want to call it. I would say Reaper for me goes into strong tier. You can make the argument for being in very easy as well, but I think it's very easy and very strong, so I put it in S tier for strong. And there are Condi builds, power builds, Celestial, you can play anything. It's really, really strong on this. It's crazy. I have guides, multiple guides about Reaper. It's just so good. I would say one of the best solo elite specs out there. Really, really strong. So that's why it's in strong, even though it's also could be very easy. Then we have Scourge. I think Scourge is not as strong as Reaper. You have to play it Condi, but it's very easy to play. That's why it goes in S2, very easy. Just straight up, in my opinion. Very, very good to be played in a solo scenario. You have barrier, you have cleanses, it's just very safe. And that's often enough to actually get all the kills that you want. On the other hand, we have Harbinger. Harbinger, on the other hand, is not as safe as Scourge. And is not as safe as Reaper. But it has amazing damage output. And it is, in my opinion, also quite good because of that. And if you know the encounters, I think you would put it in strong. Because the damage output is actually really good. and the self-sustain can also be really good. It also got buffed with the last balance patch. So I, because of that, would put it in S tier, even though it's not as good in my opinion as Reaper. So you could make the argument, because there is a better elite spec in the same class, you could make the argument to put it down into A+, but I think it's still deserving a strong S tier spot. Before I continue, I want to mention, if you like this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. But now let's go to the medium armor classes. Medium is very interesting because we have very, I would say, big changes that came with the last balance patch to medium armor classes in specifically. So let's talk about Thief. So we have a Solo Spectre, and I think Solo Spectre, in my opinion, is a very nice build that does some nice damage, has some nice range, and has the Shadow Shroud for sustain. I would say, because of just the safetiness of it, I would put it in very easy. It is not as high in the DPS and in just the crazy utility or how you can make it work as S tier strong builds, but I think from the very easy to play and just safetiness of it, I think it's deserving an S tier spot and very easy. Then we have Deadeye. I think Deadeye is for me a build that is very squishy, and if you get hit, it can be very painful and you might even die after that, but you have high evade uptime and very good healing after that. And I think the damage output is really good. I think though it's a little bit like Virtuoso, so I put it in A+ tier. That might be a little bit like on the borderline to S tier, but it's in my opinion too squishy to actually put it into S tier. You are not as good as the S tier builds because of that. So I would say in most situations very good, but in some situations a little bit painful because of the squishiness of it. The same actually goes for Harbinger. I think Harbinger can also be quite painful if you decrease your health pool very much and then you get hit with a very hard-hitting attack, you die because of that. So it's like very similar. I think Harbinger is a little bit better in my opinion because it has better range damage, but that's just my take. Take that as always with a grain of salt, you can mix a little bit here. And lastly, we have Daredevil. What can I say? Daredevil surprised me. Daredevil has, in my opinion, a very good solo build as well, and it might not be an S tier build in terms of how strong it is, but it is very easy to play. So that's why I would actually put solo Daredevil, yes, you heard that right, into very easy S tier. Really, I have a build guide coming up about this, so be sure to subscribe for that one. And it's very easy in my opinion to play, and because of that it deserves an S tier spot. It doesn't have the craziest utility and the craziest spoon uptime, but it is very easy to play and it has surprising amount of defenses and healing and just very well-rounded. That's why I would put it here in very easy. Doesn't have the craziest damage like a Reaper, for example, but still. Now let's go to Engineer. Engineer is also quite interesting because you have Mechanist. I think Mechanist, in my opinion, deserves a spot in very easy because it is very easy to play. You play, the mech carries you, you have very good boon uptime, it's just very safe from range. You can even respawn your mech if you do the gliding exploit, and in general it's just extremely strong. I would say in terms of the safetiness. In terms of damage output and stuff, I think it's not coming into S tier yet in terms of how strong it is, but the ease of use, that's why it's an S tier. Then we have Holosmith. Holosmith on the other hand is way harder to play than Mechanist, but it has good damage as well. I personally think the balance rework of Holosmith or Engineer in general made it better, but I pretty much would say it's still not S tier for me, but it's an A+ build for me. It is deserving a decent spot because it's surprisingly good in damage and also has some nice sustain. I'm not like saying it's as good as the strong tier builds, but it's A+ in my opinion. And the same actually goes for Scrapper. I think Scrapper with the rework is actually surprisingly good as well, also A+ tier. It is not as easy to play in my opinion as the Mechanist because the mech carries you and you don't have to do a lot about that. Whereas Scrapper can be a little bit more like you have to take care of all the mechanics and stuff. But I think it's still deserving a spot in A tier, A+ tier, and therefore it's there. Now let's talk about Ranger. So Ranger, we have a Condi Druid. I think Condi Druid is easy to play, has decent damage output, has decent utility. I think it's borderline between very easy and A+ tier. I will for now put it in very easy because it's surprisingly easy to play and it's also very safe because you have a lot of healing in there. It doesn't have the craziest amount of damage, but it's a druid and you can survive most encounters and kill it just a little bit slower. I think that's fine. That's why it's in very easy. Then we have Soul Beast. I think Soul Beast is, for me, really good because you have crazy amount of boon uptime. It is not as good as the upcoming other elite spec for Ranger, in my opinion, but it is because of the safetiness of it, because of its playing Celestial and having a lot of boons and stuff, and it's not that hard to play either. I think for me it's a very easy spec, but it is not as strong as the strong tier builds in my opinion. And then we have Untamed. Untamed got nerfed in the last balance patch in terms of survivability. It's notable, especially in the power build, but I would say the Condi build, in my opinion, is still very strong. The power build is also quite strong, but I think the Condi build, in my opinion, is deserving a strong and very easy spot. So I think because of that, I put it in strong. The power build is also quite good. I just personally like the Condi build a bit better because it's more safe. But in general, I think Untamed still S tier. I'm not sure if it's the best solo build, elite spec, still, but it's definitely a very good one. Anyway, now let's talk about the heavy armor classes. So let's start with Warrior. Warrior has the problem that Spellbreaker and Bladezone, let's start with Spellbreaker, is power based. You can't really play a Condi based version of it, and that makes it a little bit weaker. Why is that? Because you have to take Sakura's Relic and you have quite bad protection uptime, which is not a good combination, because that means you have to heal yourself by hitting the enemy, and if you get hit quite hard, so you have to heal quite a lot. So it's like you are in some kind of negative vicious cycle. So I would say for me A+ tier, because it's surprisingly good in damage. It's actually really good in damage, but it is a little bit squishy. And if you get hit because you don't have your full counter up, you don't dodge in time, you actually get hit hard, and that can be quite punishing. So I think it's a really fun spec, but it's not deserving a spot in S tier yet because it's a little bit more too punishing in my opinion. The same in my opinion goes for Bladezone. Bladezone is in my opinion very good in terms of damage output, and it's also quite safe. However, it is a power build that uses, so to say, not the best uptime of boons. And I think because of the struggling with protection or the struggling of healing and might generation, whatever you play, there is always a little bit of struggling there, even after buffs to it. I think it's, in my opinion, not as broken as the other Warrior specs. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because I think Bladezone is for me some kind of very aggressive spec. And I think for me it's deserving a spot in A+ tier, but it's not very easy to play in my opinion. It's also not deserving a strong spot yet, but I think it's very high in A+. That's what I would say. By the way, my tiers are not really sorted from left to right. It's just where I put them after one of each other. It's like time dependent. So not really see it like left is better than right. And then we have Berserker. I think Berserker, especially the Condi Berserker, in my opinion, is very easy to play, or somewhat easy to play, and has good sustain and good damage. I think it's borderline too strong as well, but I think it's more so easy than it is very strong. I think the damage output is surprisingly decent. It lacks a little bit of Condi glances without any changes to utility, but I think it's still deserving a spot in very easy because it's so safe to play with the range, with the invulnerability in there. It's just really nice. I really like the Condi Berserker build. It's my go-to build if I just want to have a brain off build to kill solo stuff. Let's now talk about Guardian. What can I say? Dragon Hunter, for me, you have to play power, and it's a little bit like lackluster in terms of utility that it brings and the boon output. So I would say for me A- tier. It is somewhat similar to Core Guardian. I think Core Guardian actually can be played better as a Condi build. So I think actually Core Guardian is higher than Dragon Hunter. Dragon Hunter is still playable, don't get me wrong, but in my opinion, Weaver and Dragon Hunter feel very similar. I think Weaver has higher DPS, that's why it's higher here. But in general, still very good, but not as good as A+ tier or S tier builds in my opinion. Then we have Willbender. I think Willbender is, in my opinion, a very strong and very underrated solo spec. It has surprising potential in a lot of scenarios. I think if you play it correctly, it goes into strong tier. If you struggle a bit with the mechanics of Willbender, I think you can make the argument for putting in A+ tier. I personally think it's strong because I think it's very worthwhile and working if you play it correctly. So I put it in strong. And then we have Firebrand. I think Firebrand has probably one of the best utilities baseline because of the tomes of every solo build here that we mentioned already. Does that mean it is definitely S tier, strong? I wouldn't say so, because it's still a little bit squishy and it doesn't have the crazy damage output from other strong tier builds. So I personally think it is not very easy to play, and it's also not as broken as other S tier builds. So I think for me it's highest of A+ tier, but take that with a grain of salt. I'm just saying, if you play it very well, you can make an argument for putting in strong because of the crazy good utility it provides. Now to the last class, which is Revenant. I think Revenant has one of the best elite specs. Overall, I would say probably Revenant and Necromancer are probably the best classes if you want to solo with all elite specs. Because I think, for example, Vindicator is, in my opinion, extremely strong. It has amazing sustain with all the dodges, amazing damage output, for me easy S tier strong. It doesn't have the craziest damage in comparison to, for example, a Condi Reaper, but it has so much safety, it's so easy to play. So I think it's very easy and strong, and therefore it goes into strong. Then we have Herald. Herald is very similar, but it's a little bit less focused on tanking via evading, but more so on just healing back or having invulnerability and stuff like that. So I think it's, in my opinion, Herald is deserving a spot in very easy, because it's very easy to play. You just have to keep your upkeeps up and get the nice boons and deal some damage. I think it's a little bit weaker than Vindicator in my opinion, but still very, very good. And then we have Renegade as the last elite spec. I think Renegade is less tanky typically than a Vindicator or Herald, but has more damage potential and more utility in the kit, for example CC and just a lot of nice lifesteal. So I personally really like Renegade. It is my go-to solo build right now if I want to have things done fast, because it's so good in damage. So I would definitely put it in S strong tier. It is not as easy, like I said, as the other two Revenant specs. So I would say, for me, definitely strong, but not as easy to play. Yeah, and that's my tier list. I think that's how I would leave it. I think you can see we have some really nice strong builds. We have a lot of very easy builds, and we have a very nice middle ground of A tier builds. And of course, like I said, even the baseline builds, in my opinion, are very decently capable of soloing everything. It's just my opinion that those in S tier are just better. Let me know your takes in the comments down below. Please be civilized, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Way more tier lists coming up, and way more build guides about crazy solo builds as well. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks again to all my supporters, and I hope to see you all in the next video.